Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only, Pac-Man here, and once again I am back for the likes of the Mexi Toys videos. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for some more of Let's Play of Pac-Man World 2, specifically for the Game Boy Advance. So, last time, we somehow managed to went into the majority of certain stages in the Ice World, ranging from River Run, Avalanche, in addition to Blade Mountain, and also we kick Pinky's butt, all thanks to the use of snowballs, thanks to the use of our kick technique, as we somehow technically already learned a couple of times during the use of in the majority of some stages anyway, due to leaps of faith, and in addition to, you know, trying to deal with the forms of depth perception. And as far as I'm aware, the second boss is very laughably easy compared to the forms of how it does it on the console version, in addition to the first boss in the Game Boy Advance version, as a matter of fact, so you probably get the gist of it. So, and along the way, we also did manage to grind for some more extra lives, specifically on the first stage in the Volcano world. And speaking of the Volcano world, is that today for this video is that we are about to be heading off into the next world, which appears to be the Volcano world. And conveniently enough, the first stage we're going to be jumping into in that particular world, that's of course into the volcano. Like a cool transition to the forms of the winter mountains to lava mountain environment, so we can pretty much expect what this is going. Now, as far as I'm aware, the majority of the later stages, specifically this stage in particular and onwards, this is where not only does the difficulties about to ramp up tremendously, but it's also reassuring about this too, that the levels themselves are going to be super duper lengthy, which means there's going to be a lot of backtracking involved, which is especially noticeable, that if you really want to progress, we're going to have to keep on activating multitude of switches in order to be able to progress. And also, get this though, is about the fact, remember how when I said this earlier, about the forms of that leaps of faith thing, as I mentioned it earlier? Well, we have to do it a lot, by the way, not just by the forms of the lava world, but it's also with the forms of the final world in the game as well. So this means, yes, the game itself is gonna get worse from here. In terms of difficulty spike, which is especially noticeable considering for the fact that, on the other hand, I did manage to went into some stages okay enough. Well, the only good level I can probably think about is, ironically enough, Pac Village, because mind you, that particular level is basically a tutorial level, so you can probably get the gist of it. So because of that, it is also reassuring about this too, that there's going to be some annoying moments here and there. Specifically though, once we get to the next level, then you can probably get the idea of what I was expecting to trying to mention about the forms of some major issues I have with this particular version of the game compared to the forms of how it does on the console version, including Pac-Man World for the Game Boy Advance. And no matter what though, again, you can probably tell for the fact that thankfully though, we're now on to the halfway point of our progression in terms of Pac-Man World 2 for the Game Boy Advance. I almost keep on saying PlayStation 2 version for some reason, just because, like I said before, it's been a very long time since I actually have last played Pac-Man World 2 for the PlayStation 2, but you get the gist of it. So, anyways though, so as you can tell, we already come across into ourselves a couple of deaths earlier, plus it's because, not only because of depth perception, but also, like I said before, there's going to be a lot of leaps of faith we have to deal with at this point, which is especially noticeable that, again, we're on the isometric platforming, so that's a result though, it makes platforming a lot more difficult in this version of the game, just like in Pac-Man World 1 for the Game Boy Advance, basically. So, anyways though, so yeah, a few things I want to talk about this is though, and that's what it appears to be for the fact that, well, today's date of course is the 20th of June today, in some cases in 2025 today, and if I can recall correctly, that we've only got about 3 weeks left until Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 Plus 4 remake is going to be on its way for a multitude of platforms, including Nintendo Switch 2, so much to the point that, like I said before, thankfully though, we've already got ourselves the Switch 1 version as opposed to the Switch 2 version in terms of physical copies, because as far as I'm aware, that if you get the Switch 2 physical version, well, you're unfortunately going to be in a very unlucky situation, because obviously though, you only get the download code instead of the actual game card, so yeah, you get the idea for this point. I'm guessing it's most likely because of too much gigabyte storage limitations for the actual game cards themselves for Nintendo Switch 2, because it might actually contain 64 gigabytes. In terms of the forms of, well, it's hard for me to explain about this particular analysis anyway, because mind you though, it has been about quite a few days since we actually mentioned something related to game cards, or game key cards especially, for the majority of the third-party developers as far as I'm aware. So, anyway, oh, you gotta be kidding me. Yeah, most of the time though, like I said before, since enjoying the informative on the first part of this particular Let's Play so far, there are a couple of times though where, you know, referral jumping can work sometimes, while other times though about the fact that sometimes it does not cooperate with me for most of the time, which is especially noticeable considering for the fact that you have to be exactly, you know, framed perfectly until you're able to actually jump at the right time, because if you jump wrong enough, then chances are though you will come across into a lot of deaths like this, especially in the lava world as well as the final world in the game. There's going to be a lot, I mean a lot of instant death moments, especially like, you know, with lava, and especially noticeable with the swamp. Spoiler alert for those we haven't got to this point just yet. And speaking of got to the actual exact point in time, I really genuinely think, I don't think it's possible for us to able to actually go for the entire world for this video, but definitely the next video for sure until on Monday, because trust me, why I'm saying this though is about the fact that the majority of the stages goes by not only like a marathon of some sorts, but it's also getting a lot more tedious, even with a lot of backtracking was involved, because unlike in you know, the console version, I have no problems with it whatsoever, because usually you have to go from point A to point B. I mean, there are a few rare occasions where backtracking was involved, if you really want to go for every single collectibles, likely for fruits and Galaxians especially, but most of the time though on the Game Boy Advance version, there's going to be a lot of tedium involved, so, but I digress. So yeah, let's talk about the forms of some more information about the forms of Donkey Kong Bonanza after the events of that really dang good Nintendo Direct based off from Donkey Kong Bonanza. Now, as far as I can recall correctly, that there are some updates has been revealed, not only for the UK website, but as well as the Japanese website as well. And conveniently enough though, they did manage able to change quite a lot actually, ranging from not only for its official artwork of the game, but it's also with the forms of the box art as well. Because previously though, they did previously stated about the forms of Donkey Kong and the art rock was going to be a part of the forms of the front cover art for the actual game itself, but in the forms of the most recent events, the art rock has now been replaced by the forms of younger counterparts of Pauline, just to ensure for the fact that we can able to actually expect that we can now able to actually see some new things has been added for that particular game itself. Unlike in Mario Kart World, it's basically more accurately the exact same information as we've already heard about since, you know, Nintendo Switch 2, Nintendo Direct. So, generally speaking, I can totally see why a lot of players out there attempt to prefer Donkey Kong Bonanza Nintendo Direct compared to Mario Kart World Nintendo Direct. I mean, sure, no matter what though, it's about the fact that for the time being anyway, that I'm still busy playing through Mario Kart World on my spare own time for a while, you know, Donkey Kong Bonanza is going to be on its way for Nintendo Switch 2. So as a result though, it's about the fact that currently though, I'm having a lot of fun going for the forms of free roam mode. I mean, I still haven't exactly tested out the forms of online play during my spare own time, plus it's mainly because I still need to try to get used to it, the forms of some parkour skills, mainly with the forms of wall driving and all that jazz, especially that I can get the forms of rail grinding stuff no problem, but it's just that with the forms of wall jumping is actually kind of it takes a bit while to get used to. So because of that though, although I was expecting to be able to also test it out the forms of this very interesting you know, the rewind feature, but as a matter of fact, I'm probably not going to use it that often, apart from a few exceptions, mind you, which appears to be involves around, you know, making any other mistakes if you're trying to go on to mission, basically, in a free roam mode, but that's besides the point. So, oh, and also I did manage to find out during the forms of being the Japanese website of Donkey Kong Bonanza, apparently though, that when it comes to young version of Pauline, apparently though, she is 13 years old during that time, especially considering for the fact that I'm not entirely sure if it's like an origin story for the sake of the forms of how Pauline just somehow got into another world or something like that. I mean, chances are though, is about the fact I just really cannot wait to be able to actually hear more about in terms of the storytelling for the sake of the forms of Donkey Kong Bonanza until next month or sometime. So because of that though, but still, no matter what though, is about the fact I can assure to you, we've only just got about 27 more days to go until the actual game actually launches onto Switch 2. So because of that, yeah, that's going to be super exciting and everything. And I'm sure a lot of players out there are also excited about that too. So, now, in regards to the forms of amiibo functionality that I've already pointed out since in yesterday, that yes, one of those amiibos in particular, which is of course Donkey Kong and Pauline, that they will try to able to bring out a costume for the earliest point throughout the whole game, much like the forms of how it does it for the Super Mario Odyssey amiibo, that if you manage to able to actually scan one of those amiibos in Super Mario Odyssey, then you can able to actually get one of those wedding outfits early on in Super Mario Odyssey if you manage to able to have, you know, Tuxedo Mario or Wedding Peach or Wedding Bowser amiibos, then you can obviously get those outfits early on. Although, unlike in Journey forms of without one, they have to simply try to grind as many of those coins as you want. So, in Donkey Kong Bonanza though, you can able to actually get yourselves a Delta dress early on in the forms within Pauline's costume case for the sake of the forms of Donkey Kong Bonanza, if you do have the amiibo as far as I'm aware. Now, I'm pretty darn sure that it might be possible you can still technically get that dress once you do manage to able to actually go for a lot of grinding, mainly with the forms of that particular, well, let's just say banana or bananamanium gems or something like that. I mean, relatively speaking, that was about the fact that we shall wait and see what happens once the actual game comes out. Now, I'm super excited with the forms of trying to able to experience the game, of course, but of course, we still have to go through quite a few Donkey Kong games left before we dive into the forms of Donkey Kong Bonanza once we're able to actually get that Let's Play going in the near distant future. Like, for instance though, we still need to work on Donkey Kong Country 3 for the Game Boy Advance, and on top of that, the notorious version of Donkey Kong Country for the Game Boy Color, and in addition to let's just say DK King of Swing for the Game Boy Advance, alongside with the forms of DK Jungle Climber for the DS, and on top of all that stuff though with some other spin-offs as well, ranging from Donkey Konga 1 and 2, despite the fact I don't think it's possible for me to able to go for that particular Let's Play of those two musical games, because as far as I'm aware, they do contain copyright music, so because of that though, I don't think doing those Let's Plays is going to happen. But, regardless of such though, there's also Donkey Kong Barrel Blast or Donkey Kong Jet Race if you lived in European countries, which we'll have to think about that, especially because no matter what though, I've heard so many mixed reactions about the forms of, you know, Donkey Kong Jet Race, just because of all that wacko motion controls are involved, and in addition to that, the game itself is unresponsive, because I'm almost assuming for the fact that they're trying to incorporate with the Donkey Kong bongos for the GameCube controller, but unfortunately though that's not the case, because we have to force to use not only the Wii Remote, but in addition to a nunchuck as well, which is very unintuitive at first glance, so you get the gist of it. So, but anyway, now, meanwhile, in terms of the forms of if you try to scan in other amiibos, like, for example, if you try to scan in other Donkey Kong character amiibo figurines, you're able to actually get yourselves a very cool callback to the forms of not only Donkey Kong Country, but alongside with the forms of Donkey Kong Land, and even Donkey Kong Country Returns, and Tropical Freeze as well. You do able to actually encounter the Gold Kong tiles, which means you might able to actually get some rewards if you manage to able to actually smash that particular Kong letters all in golden and everything, which I'm not entirely sure if how could I describe it per se, but regardless of such though, is about the fact that think of like the forms of trying to obtain the random sort of items from the likes of not only The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, but in addition to Tears of the Kingdom as well. So yeah, you get the idea what this is going. So anyway, so that pretty much does it into the volcano, which as a result we're now in the actual volcano itself, which pretty much leads us to the next stage, which appears to be Volcanic Panic. And don't worry, we will able to try to conclude every single portions of this whole entire world until the next video, that is. So, and I do apologize about the Fonz's very awkward commentary sometimes because I accidentally belch, which I can't help it for myself about the fact I eat so much Pac-Dots, if you couldn't tell, which you probably get the idea because I'm Pac-Man, of course. I love eating so many Pac-Dots or Power Pellets, especially, in order able to actually, like, you get the gist of it, so. And as far as I'm aware, the music track for this particular stage, as far as I'm aware, is obviously based off from Yellow Pac-Marine stage from the console version, so not exactly sure why they managed to choose that music per se, because the last time we actually hear this music was actually the intro cutscene, so yeah, still is very strange. Again, that's probably because of handheld's limitations, basically. So because of that, in fact, the whole entire soundtrack of this version of the game is incredibly limited, so yeah, you get the gist of it. So, and I as far as I'm aware, that when it comes to the forms of, what about the forms of another set of amiibos, if you try to able to scan those onto Donkey Kong Bonanza, well, all it really gets is that you're able to receive a giant sphere of terrain material to you on your adventure, as far as I'm aware. And that's all there is to it. It's all likely for its bragging rights, I suppose. So, oh, and by the way, something's worth noting for. Remember when I mentioned this before, since in yesterday, I was assuming for the fact that we're probably not going to see Diddy Kong. Well, it turns out about the fact that one of those images has been revealed for Donkey Kong Bonanza, and indeed, not only is Diddy Kong makes his appearance, but also Dixie Kong as well. So yeah, that's actually pretty interesting, all things considered, complete with its new look of not only for Diddy Kong, but also Dixie Kong as well. And apparently though, from what I've seen the images of it, apparently though, they're about to be participating in a race against with not only with Donkey Kong, but also Pauline as well. So no matter what though, I'm still very curious to know of what these specific challenges they'll brings us into. The only thing I was really hoping for is that the actual missions themselves are going to be a lot more challenging compared to the forms of how it does it on how easy it was for Super Mario Odyssey, but we shall wait and see what happens. In fact, kind of think about it, it makes things a little bit more obvious than ever that the actual developer for Donkey Kong Bonanza will be, potentially speaking of, is going to be behind the development team for the likes of the Super Mario Odyssey team. So as a result though, yeah, I can see the actual resemblance there, not only because of the forms of the visual style, but also with the forms of character expressions, mainly for Donkey Kong and Pauline and any other characters for that matter, plus because of how the fact that the game runs super smoothly, like 60 frames per second, or should I say 120 frames per second nowadays. So chances are though it's about the fact that again, I am super excited able to actually finally get to be going back on playing through Donkey Kong again on my spare own time, for able to actually try to practice the game just before you're able to actually potentially try to do the Let's Play of the game in the near distant future, like I said before, just because we still got a couple of Donkey Kong games left before we're able to actually get to that certain point. So, but I digress. So, and it's also reassuring about this too, that recently though, during the Forms of Honor Cinemas today, that obviously though, the newest Pixar film called Ello did recently came out, and unfortunately though, that particular film in mind is on track to earn Pixar's worst opening weekend after dramatically with about $20 million plus or something like that, despite the fact that the actual film itself does have the actual budget of $150 million. So no matter what though, yeah, it's not a good start, especially because after a huge success of the films of Inside Out 2 since in last year, so no matter what though, there's no surprise there about the fact that with most recent original films these days, from Pixar films these days, just starts to go a little bit of a decline, which as a result, in terms of box office perspective. So, I mean, I still have not seen the film yet though, but I might not be interested with it, which I have to admit the right to away, because the only thing I was still excited for is, of course, Zootropolis 2. That's going to be until by the end of the year, so yeah, you get the idea for that. So anyway, and it's also reassuring about this too, is about the fact that, speaking of something related to forms of Nintendo related, that apparently though, what I did recently found out, that I found was very interesting, is that apparently though, Mario Kart World is not only being developed by Nintendo themselves, but also, much like the forms of how it does it on Mario Kart 8 or Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, including Mario Kart Tour as well, as far as I'm aware, that not only is it also being developed by 1UP Studio, but in addition to Bandai Namco Studios, but also that the game has also been developed by Monolith Soft, which is also responsible for the majority of those Xenoblade Chronicles games, which I think is actually pretty cool to me though. So I think, relatively speaking, I was about the fact that I am able to actually enjoy, you know, Mario Kart World still, despite the fact I still really wish they were able to have more content, aside from, well, free roam, of course, but regardless of such, though, I still had a lot of fun playing it. But regardless of such, though, it's about the fact that I think that's as far as I can try to describe about it. Oh, in addition to that, though, it's about the fact that I've also found out that the review scores for Mario Kart World is also, gone pretty smoothly as well. Like, as far as Metacritic, as far as I'm concerned, they somehow received the score, in critics-wise, they somehow received the game as in 87 out of 100, so it's a little bit lower compared to the forms of how it does on the previous Mario Kart games, although to be fair, the actual review score did a lot better than the forms of how it does it for both, let's just say, Mario Kart Live Home Circuit or something like that, and definitely Mario Kart Tour, that's for sure, especially because of all that awkward controls and all that stuff, which is very obvious. And meanwhile, in terms of users though, for some odd reason, it's about the fact I've seen, well, the majority of them are positive, which so far is actually on to 8.2 out of 10, although I see some mixed and negative response, which I have nothing else to add. Although as far as other reviewers are concerned, well, for 4 players though, they did somehow receive the game 8.5 out of 10, and Disjoint did somehow manage to receive the game 9 out of 10, and Game Informer receives the game 8.25 out of 10, and also we've got Kim Klant. I believe that particular user receives the game 7 out of 10, which is alright, I guess. And GameSpot receives the game 9 out of 10, very obvious, because, you know, Mario Kart is awesome. And GameStar receives the game 85 out of 100, and on top of that, IGN receives the game 8 out of 10, and JinxVideo.com somehow receives the game 17 out of 20, and PCMag receives the game 4.5 out of 5, and The Guardian actually receives the game 5 out of 5. So, yeah, not too shabby for the most part, except there are some negative reviewers out there, which I don't think I can probably able to actually address the elephant in the room, per se. Plus, it's mainly because there's another topic I'd like to point out, is about the fact that one of those cards in particular, specifically though, in Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, there's actually a new card is going to be revealed, specifically though, for one of those playable characters coming up, for the sake of the forms of, well, Achiban Katsuga, I think is what it says anyway, that his particular card is actually going to be called Dragon Brave, because obviously though that's inspired by Yakuza series, so no matter what though, it makes it a little bit more obvious to be able to bring that card over to the game, so yeah, you can get the idea for that point. So, and in addition to that, one of the subjects when it comes to the forms of Disney Pixar in mind, that until specifically in 2027, they're about to be receiving, and yet another film is going to be on its way, and from what I can tell, it's going to be very similar to the forms of how it does it for that film called Flow, by the way, because chances are, though, is about the fact that it involves around the Black Cat of all things, and relatively speaking, I was about the fact that I do know it does have its different title, by the way, which I'll discuss more about that in a second. So, according to the forms of the actual description for it, it did state it this: Pixar has announced Cat 2, a new film from Luca director Enrico Cararosa, or something like that, and follows a black cat in Venice, which is in Italy, with a love of music who is stunned or shined by lyrics due to super stations, I think is what it says anyway, with new hand-painting style of animation, which it does look very promising, all things considered. So it is about to be releasing on the cinemas until in summer 2027. So that's roughly about a couple of months before or after Sonic the Hedgehog 4, and especially noticeable with the Legend of Zelda movie as well. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of movies that's going to be already being revealed for 2027 basically. So, and also I completely forgot to mention about this ever since in yesterday, by the way. Happy 10th anniversary of the film's release of Inside Out. So yes, it's been the entire a decade ago since when the first Inside Out film came out. And while looking back on it though, I still had a great time experiencing Inside Out basically after 10 years since when it first came out. Because I think, fundamentally speaking, I was about the fact I do remember that I went to see it with not only with Mario, but also with Sonic as well. During films have been around in 2015, I think it was. Well, usually in the UK version, we have to receive the film quite late. So as a result, though, we ended up seeing it sometime in Journey Falls of around August or something like that. I suppose that seems to be the case. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact I do remember that I fully enjoy every aspect in terms of Inside Out. So yeah, you get the idea about that, especially about the fact it's a good thing that Inside Out received a sequel, Inside Out 2, so we can pretty much expect to believe that we can now able to enjoy both of those films on not only on physical media, but in addition to Disney Plus as well. So yeah, that's about it basically. So oh, in addition to that, speaking of anniversaries, as far as I'm aware, did you know there was actually a film company called Studio Chabu, or Chablis, I think it's what it says anyway. That particular company was actually now 40 years old, so as a result, happy 40th anniversary to Japanese best animation studios with beautiful scenery, emotion characters, cute animals, magical creatures, scary images, plain endings, I think is what it says anyway, and heartwarming moments for the sake of that particular studio itself, which I already know for the fact that they did make some very, very cool animations back then, which is especially noticeable considering for the fact that, well, you get the idea for that point. So, oh, in addition to that, I've recently managed able to go back on playing through Sonic Dash on my spare own time, and no matter what though, I've managed able to actually unlock yet another unlockable character, and can you guess what that is? Well, you may have guessed it, Neo Metal Sonic from Sonic Heroes. And let me tell you, I am very pleased that I somehow managed able to unlock that character though, especially considering for the fact that, although it might played out kind of similar to Metal Sonic, or Metal Sonic version 3.0, but regardless of such though, it is nice to have Neo Metal Sonic as a playable character in not only in Sonic Dash, but also in Sonic Forces Speed Battle as well. So yeah, you can get the idea for the solution right here, although as far as I'm aware, I haven't got any luck to try to able to actually unlock Sheriff Sonic just yet though, but maybe during a later time I will do. But regardless of such though, I'm also able to actually try to say that I'm also take a break on playing through Sonic Dash for a while again, so just so I'm sure for the fact that there's going to be yet another, well, unlockable character is going to be on its way. So, and I suppose, I don't know about you, but about the fact that no matter what though, the weather condition itself so far is actually going to get ridiculously hot, which is especially noticeable considering for the fact that we're still on summer, of course. So, and no matter what though, at this point in time, that I was assuming for the fact that, remember back in Journey Informs of how the fact that I was originally though, trying to able to act, oh, you gotta be kidding me. Oh, I hate leaps of faith. It's so hard to judge the distance sometimes. Ah, thank goodness this level's over, which, believe me, that, it only gets worse from here, especially how ridiculously lengthy the later stages can be. So, for the time being though, let's go ahead and grind for some more extra lives, and I don't think it's possible for us to able to actually go for the next stage, in addition to the next boss fight as well. So as a result though, those two levels in particular can wait during at some point until on Monday, so yeah, we can pretty much expect about the fact that time can definitely tell up to that point. So anyway, and there's also some other things I would like to classify for something, and that's what it appears to be for the fact that, well, conveniently enough, there's also yet another anniversary thing that have already just happened, since in Journey Informs it around 4 days ago for some time. That's of course Batman Forever, which, yes, happy 30th anniversary of the film's release of Batman Forever, which I've heard about the film before, but I've never actually seen it for myself, you see, because on the other hand, that I'm still basically waiting for some other films during that time, especially that, like I said before, the next movie I'm about to be seeing on the big screen, and that's of course Zootropolis 2, or Zootopia 2, if you lived in North America. So, and I suppose that's technically the final thing I want to mention about. Speaking of which, in terms of the forms of Nintendo Switch 2 itself, apparently though, there's actually a legal action in regards to the forms if you managed able to obtain a flash card, which appears to be called MIG Switch cartridge, which as a result, it allows you to able to actually have multitude of ROMs onto your Switch 1 or Switch 2 to be more specifically. And apparently though, Nintendo actually bans Switch 2 owners using that particular Mac or MIG Switch cartridges. So this means about the fact if you dare use it online, this means about the fact you can't able to actually access your Nintendo Switch 2 anymore. So because of that though, good thing I did not get that particular thing itself. So yeah, you can get the idea for this point. So with that being said folks, let's not forget endings up at this point right here. So join me next time for some more of Let's Play of Pac-Man World 2 for the Game Boy Advance, and that's what it appears to be for the fact that we're going into Magma Opus, and hopefully we can conclude the Volcano world. So I'll see you guys until on Monday. Later fellas.